make sure you take advantage of that. And I think that's all I have. Nobody's here to listen to me, so I'm going to quickly throw this over to our keynote. So this morning we have Andrew Hay, the co-founder and CTO of Leo Security. Andrew's going to do a very good intro of himself, far better than I could. So with that, please welcome Andrew.
All right. Well, that seems kind of loud. All right. Welcome. Good morning. It is early. It feels early. I'm somewhat awake. I've had one coffee, so see if I can energize you guys a little bit past my level right now. Ooh, oh, that'll help. If anyone wants to take a nap, I'm not going to be upset. Mo will be, especially for his students. So my name's Andrew Hay. We're going to be talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that's really researching anything. Anything you may want to research. And these slides will be available, so don't feel you have to take pictures of everything. I know that's kind of a pain when someone clicks through the slides too fast. But very brief background on me. CTO and co-founder of Leo Cybersecurity. We're a cybersecurity consultancy, and that's all I'm going to say about that. If I'm not a sales guy, I'm a CTO. So I like doing cool stuff, not trying to sell you stuff. I was also the CISO at Data Gravity, which recently got acquired by a company whose name I can't remember. I was the director of research at OpenDNS, which is kind of where I was forced to find my passion for security research. And built that team, and now they're part of Cisco. I am not. I was director of research at CloudPassage. I actually worked and lived in Lethbridge for like three and a half years. And getting off the plane here, I'm like, wow, it's windy. I remember that. And I also lived and worked in Bermuda at a bank in the information security office. Wow. Anyone epileptic here? No, all right. I've written a bunch of books that none of you have read. Don't worry about it, you're not going to hurt my feelings. And I spend a lot of time on planes because, as you can tell, I'm built for coach travel. If you look at my Twitter feed, you can actually see a picture that I took of myself in the CRJ bathroom. And I actually hurt my neck getting the picture because it was like, I could barely fit in there. So what's so special about me? Well, I'd have my mother come up and tell you about that. I've managed researchers, I've managed engineers, I've done security research myself. I would say the last thing that I did any sort of big research on was, does everyone remember the Hello Barbie connected Barbie doll? So this is the first warning that I'm going to give you guys if you want to start researching something. Make sure that you're okay to have your name associated with something like Barbie. Because I would go to conferences and be like, oh, you're the Barbie guy. Yeah, I'm the Barbie guy. But I guess it's better than being known as the rubber dick connected rubber dick guy. Ha-ha! Because you could research cars all day long, but the moment you start researching a connected penis, you're the connected rubber dick guy. Also, I've done a lot of research on websites, malicious websites, presented at Black Hat, DEF CON. I can't even remember how many talks I've given over the last 5-10 years. I think this is actually my 14th BSides that I've spoken at since it started. I spoke at the second BSides. I ran BSides Ottawa once. I learned my lesson. So I say that I'm a self-taught data scientist, and what that really means is that I had a bunch of data scientists that I worked with that were way smarter than I could ever hope to be. So I had to teach myself data science so I knew what the hell they were talking about. Because, so one of the guys, had a PhD in computer science and graph theory. I didn't know that was a thing. So he would explain to me all of these complex graph theory equations and everything on napkins. And he's like, do you understand that? I'm like, yeah, I understand it enough, I guess. So a lot of the research we were doing didn't rely entirely on graph theory, but it had a lot of its basis in there. And I have another presentation just on graph theory, which, it's too early in the morning to talk about graph theory. It's always too early in the morning to talk about graph theory. So, how many people have heard of Pasteur's Quadrant before? Yeah, like 5 people. So, this is really the applied versus basic research. And there are people that will do, purely academic and basic research where they're doing it for the sake of researching it because it's for the greater good. Is it going to turn into anything? Maybe not. Might turn into additional great ideas that someone else can follow up on. But then there are people that are doing practical, hands-on research where there's immediate feedback. And I usually put, Charlie Miller and Chris in the top right in that user-inspired basic research because they had an idea of, hey, you know what? We could probably hack cars and that'd be a bad thing. So let's do that and prove to the automotive manufacturers and the general public that it's a bad thing. And I think everyone knows how that went. It turns out connected cars can be attacked. And then there's the pure applied research. So has anyone ever met Deviant Ollam before? Does lockpicks. Very, very good at picking locks. That is practical research. You give him a lock, he will go fiddle with it, and he will learn how to pick that, and he'll document it and release it in a video or a presentation. That is hands-on practical research. Is that to make the lock manufacturers better? Not really. But does it have a purpose? Yes. There is a goal. So I often say, and this might be hard to see, but the top left is your knowledge, bottom right, utility. So you want to try and figure out where you are on the spectrum and what you're researching. So you probably won't be able to read this, but this is does everyone remember the whole thing last year? Like, I'm an engineer, I look like an engineer thing? I will tell you, I don't look like an engineer. If you look at my GitHub repo, you will know very quickly that I am not an engineer because it is terrible. So data scientists share a lot in common with security researchers. Maybe not 100% similarities or alignment, because let's be honest, we're not all good at math. In fact, I suck at math. I am extremely bad at math. So I am not going to do any math-based security research because it will be horrible and way above me. But statistics is easy. You just take the math that someone's already done and you can do it in Excel if you want. That's a little bit of an oversimplification, but try it. Programming, I call myself a hacker in that I hack and slash things to get it to work, and you will see that in my code. But I'm a big communications and visualization person. I want to communicate my findings to someone, and that is extremely important when you're conducting research. Is you can do it for yourself, but if you want to get a new job or have a full-time job just doing security research, which does exist, you need to figure out how to communicate and publish those findings so the world can consume them. And what is missing from the data scientist, I look like a researcher type thing, I say is curiosity. There's also event and action-driven type of research. Like, for example, the Hello Barbie. I found out that it was coming out, and then I spent probably a day and a half just researching Hello Barbie while at work, which I caught a lot of grief from my coworkers. They're like, why is he browsing to buy Barbie? He doesn't have any kids. We don't think he has a windowless van, but we should probably check on that. But yeah, so I was just searching for Hello Barbie and schematics and how much and I ordered it on Amazon, and then it showed up at work, which I, in hindsight, probably shouldn't have had it delivered to work, because here I am unboxing a Barbie, and people are walking by, what the hell is he doing? And I'm researching, I swear. So that was definitely an action or event-driven type of activity, because it was being released. I wanted to be the first to research it and get my findings out there, and I did. There's also go-to-market time sensitivity. So if you're working for a company, and so security research, if you are paid to be a security researcher full-time or even part-time, there is usually a tie-in with marketing. For better or for worse, there is a marketing slant to anything you research. If you find something that is scathing, or that, God forbid, the product that the company you work for sells can mitigate the problem, and based on what I've seen at RSA, the silver bullets come out every February to April at the conference that fix all these problems that get discovered. But there is market sensitivity to your research. So I'll give you a great example, is dealing with academic data scientists that are doing security research. Has anyone here been a researcher in an academic capacity? So yeah, a couple of people. Usually those are driven by grants. So your job is tied to the length of the grant. Do you have to produce something in that time? Not necessarily, because you could get another grant to keep going with your research. So the concept of, hey, you're researching something, will it be ready in 3 months? Oh, no. Well, when will it be ready? When it's done. If you're a marketing person, that's like nails on a chalkboard. It's like, what do you mean when it's done? Like, I can't turn that into anything. Like, oh, you can when it's done. So there is that sensitivity as well. If you're using it, doing your research with the support of the company you work for. If you're doing it independently, you can take all the time in the world. Now, there are pros and cons to research. If you do new research, I would say the biggest pro is that you get to define the scope of the research. You can make it do whatever you want. And you have the potential to get to market first with your research. So if you've ever dreamed of speaking at DEF CON or another hacking conference around the world, and you have cutting edge research that nobody else has done, this is how you get an invite to speak at one of those conferences. And I'll tell you, it's pretty cool once you swim through the sea of people to get to your room. The con, though, is that it is extremely time-consuming. So the only saving grace I had when I was doing my Hello Barbie research is that my wife loved watching Dancing with the Stars. So every Monday, I had about 2.5 hours to do research in another room away from the TV and that stupid television show. That is also, and in prior years, I taught myself Ruby during Dancing with the Stars. I taught myself Python during Dancing with the Stars. It was great. Thanks, Dancing with the Stars and your stupid show. So the cons, if there is a time sensitivity, there's a crunch that you feel artificially. If you're continuing someone else's research, that's kind of interesting because you can find new results. So someone can come out and say, hey, we found that, and I'll use the Hello Barbie, for example. Hello Barbie communicates back to cloud infrastructure and it's unencrypted. And that's your research. So let's fast forward 2 months and let's say they fix the problem and you want to research it, you want to pick up the research. You say, okay, well, it's using SSL encapsulation right now, but it's using a weak cipher. And that means this, that, and the other thing. So that's furthering research. And that, it's a little bit faster. You don't have to do a lot of the heavy lifting yourself. And a lot of the prior work and data and testing methodology exists. The con, though, is that you don't really have a lot of control over the experiment itself because it has been run in the past. You're creating an offshoot of that prior research, and you're trying to prove or disprove something with that research. And you could be finding that you're breaking findings that people already know and they just haven't disclosed. One of the worst things you can hear as a researcher is, oh yeah, I presented that 6 years ago at this conference. Thanks for stealing my work and not attributing anything to me. You can say that all you want because they're like, 6 years ago. Wow, I don't even remember a day ago. So that's not a huge deal. What's fun and is kind of a pain is challenging someone's research. So if you disagree with the way a research study was conducted or the results were derived, you can challenge that research and take your own methodology with the data that they have used, if you can get it from them, and make different findings. So that is, it's good because the data is there if you can get your hands on it. What's bad, though, is if you're going to ask someone like, hey, can I have your data? I want to disprove your findings. They'll be like, no. Go get the data yourself. However, if you approach and say, hey, I just want to validate your findings, can I get your raw data set? And I just want to make some, ask some intelligent questions of the data, they're a lot more open because you're not outright saying, my goal over the next 6 months is to make you look like an idiot in the public eye. People don't like that. So these are questions. So who here has ever wanted to research something? Like an IoT device or whatever? Yeah. First question you should ask yourself, if you want to get into a project, is what is the question you're trying to answer? If you're just saying, I want to hack this because I want to hack this, it's little focus. You're not really, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no results that are going to benefit or adversely impact society if you just say that. So what do you want to answer? So hello, Barbie. I want to know if children interacting with this toy, if the data that they're communicating to the public cloud is safe and secure for children. Do you have data to answer the question? That's another great question. You can say, hey, you know what? I don't think this is going to work, or I don't think this information is valid. But if you don't have the data, you can't really support that. You're just guessing. So that's why IoT research and connected toys are great, because you can have these things in your environment, in your test lab, and it's a tangible, hands-on research subject. So if you get through 1 and 2, ask yourself, if you could answer the question from question 1, could you use the answer? And that's a big one. This is the kind of the stumper, like, well, I can do all this research, I can prove it, what am I going to do with it? Is it of any value to me whatsoever, or am I just doing it for the sake of doing it? So if you can take that information and disclose it publicly, can you create a talk out of it? Can you get someone at the company to take note and say, help us fix this problem? I would say those are outcomes that fall into number 3. Like, that's something you can do with the data and the results of your research. Wow, that's small. All right, so these are just types of questions. I'm going to skip over this. These are questions that you can ask of the data, or ask people, or ask of your research. Usually what you want is the exploratory or the inferential, because you're asking a question. Does X do Y? And will it impact Z? Being Canadian, I rarely get the chance to say Z and not have people look at me funny. So that was kind of fun. Also, no one sitting in the audience saying, oh, you're Canadian, aren't you? It's like, So this is the epicycle of data analysis. So once you've decided you're going to research something, I'm going to research something, You need to set your own expectations and the expectations of your research. So you will have to question, explore the data, gather the data, create formal models, interpret the results, and do something with it. And then when you're collecting the information, make sure you're doing it in a way that doesn't influence your hypothesis. You just want to collect the data. So you don't want to say, I want to know if this device is communicating out to the internet or communicating back and forth with the internet in clear text, and then the only data you collect is network captures from inbound traffic. That's not great data collection because you're only seeing half of the conversation. And there's a lot of other things you can do as well to get that information and that data set to make inferential and exploratory questions. And then revise your expectations. So let's say my hypothesis was, Hello Barbie communicated with cloud infrastructure in clear text, HTTP. And I start doing the research, I gather the data, and I immediately find with the data set that there is no plain text HTTP connections going back and forth. It's all SSL. So I have to revise my research hypothesis to say, okay, though it is encapsulated, does it use weak protocols, or is the communication method insecure between the device and the endpoint cloud infrastructure? And then you go through this again. You just keep going through it until you're happy with the results. So I often tell people if they want to start researching something, you have to have a question. You have to be curious about the answer. Don't just do it because you've got nothing better to do, because you'll spin out of control and you'll drop it halfway through your research. I've done that before, where someone has said, hey, you should go research this. And I really wasn't passionate about it. I didn't really care. So I started researching it. I'm like, this is, I don't really want to do this. I'm going to go do something else. So have genuine curiosity about the project that you're undertaking. And then time. You need time. Find your Dancing with the Stars moment where you can do research away from friends, family, coworkers, whatever, just so that you know you have time to dedicate to your research. And then your ability to execute. If you gather the data, do you know how to work with the data? Are you going to dump it into an Excel spreadsheet and, is it all clear text? Is it a CSV or a TSV that you've downloaded? Or is it just a whole bunch of disparate data points? Is it in an R data format for R or SciPy or something like that? You need to know how to work with the data that you're collecting. And then if you're doing device, or I classify it as an asset, any sort of research you're doing with a tangible endpoint, let's say, do you have access to it? Or do you have access to the data that someone can send to you to help you prove or disprove your hypothesis? So let's talk a little bit about asset acquisition. So I like to tell people to start with a consumer electronic device because they're so easy to find and they're relatively inexpensive, and it will blow your mind how poorly they're secured in most cases. So you can go buy electronics, software, connected toys. One word about connected toys, make sure you find like a Wi-Fi Alliance little logo on it, because then you know it's got Wi-Fi. The last thing you want to do is buy something, bring it home, and say, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Wi-Fi, but it's Bluetooth. Okay, well, that's kind of changing my investigation mode here. I have to change my research around. You can borrow from friends, work, colleagues, from your neighbor. And when I say borrow from your neighbor, I don't mean break into their house or start hacking their router from your house or apartment. That's probably a bad idea. You can rent equipment. It's great that you can go to all these stores and they have these fantastic return policies. One word of advice, Don't try and get a connected television the week before Super Bowl and expect to be able to return it after Super Bowl, like immediately after. That will raise a whole bunch of red flags, and they'll probably be on to you from that point forward. So, spread it out. Spread the love amongst different companies. Just make sure that they have a good open box return policy. And then you can either get your money back or get credit to further your research. When it comes to software, trial software is genuinely as good as paid-for software. There should be feature, especially if it's licensed, locked, or unlocked. You didn't hear this from me, but it's very easy to reverse software and bypass any mechanisms that are being, obfuscated from the trial user. So if you want to download software and it's a 30-day trial, sometimes you can just put it into a VM and then just reset the date, and that'll be fine. Kill connectivity to the internet, it's cool. You can do your research. If you need to buy software or subscribe to software, like a SaaS portal, I would advise not going after like a huge SaaS vendor because they generally have very big security teams that will say, why are you trying to poke us in the eye with a stick, and block you. Make sure you always get authorization to do the testing, especially if it's a hosted application where there's probably security people watching. Plus illegal and stuff. So some of my favorite places to go shopping. I love going to Costco because they have a fantastic return policy. They have a full refund on anything. You can open it up, shake it up. If you scratch it, you can return it and say, yeah, it was scratched when I took it out of the box 6 months ago. And they generally have new equipment and new technology, especially for consumer electronics. So it's a good place to go and start buying stuff. If you buy and return stuff every other week, though, it's probably going to set off some flags somewhere. So again, spread it around. Target in the US, very good place to go. Again, they have a fairly lenient policy when it comes to return. Anything that is Target branded, you can return anytime, within a year for a full refund or exchange. There's not a lot of Target branded consumer goods or consumer electronic goods, but there are a few. Will anything be done if you find a massive vulnerability? I don't know. I've never really researched stuff at Target. As it turns out, whatever I buy at Target, I tend to just hang on to. It could be because I'm too lazy. That's neither here nor there. But yeah, I haven't had to return anything yet. Fry's. Has anyone ever been to a Fry's Electronics in the States? It is a nerd wonderland. I told my wife one time that I was going to go to Fry's and get some stuff for research. And she's like, you're not going alone. So here I am with a shopping cart, like a kid in a candy store, walking down the toy aisle, like, ooh, this is cheap. Ooh, this is cool. This is made in a country that I didn't know exported anything. And I just pick up all these things, and I got to the cash, and $350 later, I had a whole bunch of research stuff. But it's very good for researchers. They are researcher friendly, I've found. You can return stuff within 30 days. So maybe don't go and buy $500 worth of equipment thinking that you're going to get through it all and then return it in 30 days. You're probably not. Best Buy, most of the products, 15-day return policy. Cell phones, 14 days. Wedding registry items, though, 60 days. So, most products, 15 days, unless it's on the wedding registry. So, and I've had friends do this before where it's like, yeah, we're going to put a big screen TV on the wedding registry. Like, whoa, you think a lot of your friends. But you can set up your own wedding registry, put a whole bunch of stuff that you want on it, and see if this works. I haven't tried it yet, but it sounds interesting. So some of the core research ideas. So this isn't any sort of formal process at all. This is based on my experience and my knowledge. I find network research, so networking communications between devices and cloud infrastructure, I find that, in my mind, the easiest way to see how things are working. But I started out doing routing, switching, firewalls, a lot of packet analysis and incident response, so that comes very naturally to me. If you're a software engineer or have a lot of experience in coding, you may find the software, so UI, UX, back-end systems, you may find that much easier to fiddle with compared to network infrastructure. I show you in a couple slides how they're kind of tied at the hip when you're doing your research, and the benefit of knowing both sides or having people to collaborate with that know both of these things, or one of these things if you know the other, makes the research a lot better. Platform research, so this is operating system, cloud infrastructure platform. If you are an AWS expert and you want to start doing research on Microsoft Azure, you're going to have a steep learning curve because it's relatively different. The naming is different. Some of the feature functionality is different between the different devices or the different platforms. You need to know that as part of your research. If you don't know that ahead of time, then that's added research time that you need to account for. Hardware. If you like ripping apart stuff, soldering your forehead to the table kind of thing, then this is for you. It's a whole other discipline that is completely beyond me. I cannot open up and look at a circuit board and say, oh yeah, I need to look at these pins, and this is where everything is going to be stored. That's not me. I don't have that mindset. I'm not an electrical engineer. There are people, though, that this is their primary focus. They focus on hardware hacking because that is, as close to the bones as you can get, and you can make it really do anything. So it's a valuable skill to know, along with intimate knowledge of circuitry and how that works. So if you can pull out your digital multimeter and get a password, good for you. That's not me. Yeah, I'll skip over that. So the research team, and I use the word team loosely because you might be a one-person team. But if you're researching a device, like let's say just a Wi-Fi router, for example, you can have someone that knows how that device communicates when it plugs in. So I'll give you actually, instead of a Wi-Fi router, let's go with a Samsung Smart TV. So when you plug in a Samsung Smart Television, it does a lot of communications to places all over the world. Samsung is a Korean company. It phones home to Korea, but it's okay, it's South Korea, it's the friendly one. But as soon as I saw like the geo IP, I'm like, Korea, oh, South Korea. But you need to be able to interpret that information at a network layer to know that this thing is phoning home to all of these different places. And this is before you even configure it. This is, you plug the television in, you plug in the network cable, and it starts just chatting at home. Hardware expertise, by all means, if you want to open up that television and see what's what, see if there's additional circuit boards in there that don't really make a lot of sense. I will tell you that a lot of televisions have old software and old hardware that is built into the system that is just not activated because they made a change during manufacturing. Like, yeah, we're not going to include that feature, so we'll run power to the board, but we're not going to do anything with it. That happens. And then software. Smart TVs are essentially big web servers, which is both fun and a little scary considering how many of these things show up in boardrooms all across the world. And I kind of have a rule. It's more of a saying that if it has an Ethernet port or network connectivity, some idiot is going to connect that fridge or blender to the internet because they can. And that is very true in corporate North America because I've got an internet-connected fridge. Well, I should probably connect it because I'm not using all the features. So I'm just going to connect that to the corporate network and make sure it can communicate out to the internet. Yeah, it needs to update because we are all very concerned with making sure patches are properly applied all the time, in theory. So let's say you don't have all this expertise, or maybe you have one person that knows networking and hardware, and a second person who knows the software side of things. Or let's say you have no hardware expertise. You don't have a friend or a colleague that can do the hardware side of the things, but you can do the network and the software. This doesn't mean that you can't research the project. This just means that the hardware aspect is not in scope for your research, which is fine. You know, I'm not going to buy a television, rip it apart, try and fiddle around with the circuit boards, put it back together after I've fried everything, and then try and take it back and say, yeah, I don't know what happened. It was like this out of the box. I'm still smoking. So I would personally focus on the network and the software because I don't have the hardware expertise. And conversely, if you have hardware and network expertise, just do that part of the research. If you only have hardware expertise, then that is your research focus. Your hypothesis is going to pertain to the hardware aspects of the device or of the asset that you're researching. So if you're missing expertise, make do with what you have. Reevaluate your hypothesis and make sure that you are still answering a question of the data with this limited visibility that you now have. So if you absolutely had to have hardware expertise to do this project or to research it, then maybe you take a step back and say, okay, well, I'll put this on the shelf and I'll go look at something else. And then maybe come back to this after I've gained hardware knowledge or someone has done additional research on the hardware side, and I can take that information, reference it, and then continue on with the network and the software side. It never hurts to, put up a flag on Twitter or any sort of social media saying, hey, does anyone know how, this circuit board works or the internal circuitry for XYZ works? Because generally someone will say, oh yeah, I ripped it apart when it first came out. There was one guy when we started doing the Hello Barbie research, and he was busy at his day job. He didn't want to be outed and be included in the research. But he was doing like full autopsy of Barbie. And it was kind of creepy, all the pictures he was taking. Because it was like an autopsy. Like, okay, I've cut her in half, and here's what's on the inside. And she's kind of like laying like this, and looked like a crime scene. But yeah, so we started down that path with him, and he's like, well, no, I don't really want to publish research because I don't want this to be associated with me. So that's when we reevaluated our research scope and we dropped hardware from the equation. Since then, people have done just the hardware aspect of the Hello Barbie toy, and they didn't reference any of our work, but that's their loss, I suppose. So if you want to research something, and this is, there's been tons of papers and presentations on how to build a home lab. This is really the 10,000-foot view of the different types of research that you can do. Go to the software download site, download firmware, get the device, analyze the firmware app, have an analysis station that you can pull all your information into and aggregate everything. I will tell you that most IoT consumer electronics have a mobile app component. I will also tell you that there's a lot of shared libraries and code bases, especially if that vendor does a lot of mobile apps for a ton of different companies. Toy Talk. So is there any need for the Hello Barbie web app to have Thomas the Tank Engine code when it was built? The answer is no, and Toy Talk admitted to that, and they changed their build process as a result of our research. They're like, oh, thanks, we didn't know that was in there. Like, oh, you didn't realize this huge bloat on your app that, whatever, all right, you removed it, good for you. So yeah, there's typically a mobile app component, and if you want to forge a career in hacking mobile devices, mobile app hacking, not a bad place to start. So networking side of things. Typically, you're going to have an isolated external router, and I'm talking home lab here, or even an office lab, because you're probably not going to be able to, unless this is a very well-funded company that you're working for that's sponsoring your research, you're not going to have like this massive corporate infrastructure segmented lab. You're probably going to have some like cheap Linksys routers on either side, kind of keeping it away from the network so that you can monitor traffic as it goes from router to router or from device to router. And you're going to want a hub. Has anyone here tried to buy a 10100 hub recently? You know how friggin' hard that is now? It is almost impossible. Like, I went on Amazon and I found used ones for like hundreds of dollars. Or I could get a desktop switch for 10. Like, come on, guys, just make a hub or get a network tap. If you are using a switch for your research, make sure that it has the ability to do port mirroring so that you can actually see the traffic. Or get one of the, the Ninja taps. Ninja Star, yeah. Pretty cool. Plus, you can practice your soldering and solder your head to the star. It's fun. You're going to have an analysis station, and you know what? Go buy a big USB drive and make sure that's where all of your data resides. You don't have to build this massive pipeline or an Elasticsearch backend with Kibana, and that's cool, but that's what you're going to see. You're probably not going to expose that to the world, because then you're just asking for a whole bunch of more trouble, unless that is your product idea. I know VCs in the Valley that would look at that and say, that's adorable. That's not a product. So just so you know, store it where you want to store it. Just make sure you can access it. Also, if you're doing an IoT camera or a Wi-Fi enabled device, you're going to want it to connect to the internal router so that you can sniff the traffic going out to the internet. So bidirectional, make sure that you're going to capture the IPs, the domains, the URLs that they're fetching, any redirects that you're being sent to when these things are phoning home. And it's a good way to find out the cloud hosting infrastructure and where it's located, who's hosting it. And then you can take it one step further and say, okay, well, this is all in Amazon AWS US East. What else is there? Let's see, Netflix, whole bunch of other massive internet capable SaaS platforms. That's why if Instagram goes down, Netflix is also down too most times, because a lot of the core infrastructure is in that US East region. So if you find that if you're rolling something out and you're testing it for work, let's say, and it's a device that you want to roll out across the company, like oil fields. Let's say you're putting sensors in oil fields, and they all phone home to this one Amazon US East region that you know is highly saturated and always attacked because of who lives there. You might want to reconsider or talk to the vendor and say, hey, maybe can we get a different region? Because we kind of need oil field reporting stuff to happen continuously. We can't just go, oh, sorry, we have no idea what happened on the pipeline for 8 hours. Sorry. It's not going to fly. That's a whole other talk too. So the software side of things, you're going to need an analysis station. You are probably going to have some reverse engineering tools, some UIs, understand the APIs. And understanding the APIs, 10, 15 years ago, getting an API doc out of a developer was like pulling teeth. Now it's only like ripping off a couple fingernails. It's not as hard, but a lot of this information is posted online, and a lot of new companies are building their applications from the API up, as opposed to thinking, hey, we should probably put an API in this product that everyone's asking for the last 4 years. So it's very well documented in that respect. So start with the docs. Hardware, two pieces, the actual device and the device firmware, and then the mobile app. We talked about that a little bit before. Mobile app hacking, very lucrative target. And then some suggested equipment. So if you're building your home lab, hub, tap, switch with span port, get 2 cheap Wi-Fi routers. They do not have to be anything special. They don't even have to be something that is updated frequently because technically it's buried deep in your network. RJ40, yeah, allegedly. And you don't need to patch. We've covered that. You never need to patch. Make sure you have a whole bunch of extra RJ45 cables. Being a network guy from the start, I can tell you horror stories of troubleshooting network connectivity and finding out it was a bum cable after spending days troubleshooting. Oh, it's got to be the network config or the driver on this network card. Oh, did you try just changing the cable? Hey, it works now. Make sure you have lots. And make sure you know how to run Wireshark, TCP dump. There are tutorials all over the internet. Software, get friendly with a debugger. There's a lot of debuggers. They're not all for pay. So you can get OllyDebug for free. You can get trials of other debuggers for free. If you're a Mac user, Hopper Disassembler, relatively cheap, and it's pretty slick looking. Fuzzers. Always assume that organizations have done some sort of fuzz testing against their software, but don't assume that they've done a good job at it. So while you're doing your research, why not kick off a couple fuzzing sessions for the web UI or for some of the open ports and just see, if something makes it crash. And then you go back to that report later and say, oh, this is interesting. Let's see what triggered this, and add that to your research. Port scanners, vulnerability scanners. A lot of cloud infrastructure is running operating systems with outdated software and outdated patches. Heartbleed was huge, and a lot of vendors scheduled it for later corrective actions, as opposed to the immediate corrective actions of ignoring it and not pretending it's not a problem. If you're going to do hardware, again, you should probably go look at a presentation, the link at the bottom here, and it's really all the tools that you need to do hardware hacking. But if you can get your hands on an oscilloscope on eBay, that's cool. Software-defined radio is also very cool, and there's a lot of tutorials out there on how to use SDR to do your research. Some cool stuff there. Don't worry, guys, there's only about an hour and a half left. So, knowing when to stop. You can stop because you're lazy, or you can stop because you've come to a finishing point. One of those, I've defined 4 main reasons for stopping your research. Those artificial or organic time constraints where someone from marketing comes to you and says, you need to have something that we can publish in 6 months, go. And that is your time constraint. So you have to change your research to fit into that time constraint, which it hurts the souls of data scientists and academic researchers, but most security researchers are like, yeah, we get it, fine. We'll narrow the scope, we'll do what we can. We'll work 24 hours for several days. Sleep's for rich people. You might want to stop because, hey, maybe the research is not that important anymore. If you're researching Palm Pilots, technically you've got all the time in the world. Are you going to do much with that? Probably not. Najo has a BlackBerry she could lend you that she still uses. Yeah, she's so retro. So, also, someone may have proved or disproved your hypothesis. Leading up to DEF CON is when most researchers, especially on Twitter, start complaining that someone stole their research or they're not going to research this because someone else did it. You can do that. You can just throw like a temper tantrum, or you can keep going with your research because you might find something that they didn't catch, and then you can collaborate and maybe do a joint talk at DEF CON, which is a stronger submission. You could also finish because you were successful, you proved your hypothesis, or you can stop because you successfully failed. Failure is an option in research. Just because you disproved your hypothesis doesn't mean that your research failed. It means that your research succeeded in finding or disproving your hypothesis, which is probably not going to be very newsworthy, but at least you know. So you have to define what success looks like. You have to know when to stop. So these are successful research outcomes. New knowledge is created, decisions or policies or something happens as a result of your research, such as a fix or a patch. You've created a report or a presentation, you've given an interview, something to get your research out there, and success is also that the data you have doesn't quite answer the question that I posed. So then you just go back into that epicycle that I talked about earlier. So again, not every research project is a success, and that's okay. It's just validation that it resulted in a negative result, which sounds a lot fancier than it sucked, I failed. So if you're going to present and defend your research, which I strongly suggest you do, this is kind of the data science Roger Peng model that he's defined. So you have all of this, like this is kind of a lot to digest, but I've summarized it a little bit more. Sometimes the results of your findings could be a blog post, as simple as a blog post. On a personal blog, on a company blog, whatever. It could be an article. The trade magazines love to hear about research, specifically anything targeting children. Let me rephrase that. That sounded terrible. Consumer electronic devices made for children. If you find security vulnerabilities in those devices, the media wants to hear about it because that is a human interest story, and that puts children at risk. If you're so print or public or online application, if you think it's really big news, offer an exclusive to a big name reporter, someone who gets a lot of followers, who has very big reach. Go with those people, and then go to the smaller ones. Usually put a time limit on. Say, hey, you know what? I'll give you an exclusive, but you have to write about this by the end of the week. Do you have the bandwidth to do it? And they'll take a look at the research and your findings and say, yeah, I can't do anything with this, or yeah, this is great. Let's have a call and talk about some finer points of the research, and they'll write a story about it. Academic paper. So I'm not an academic, so this feels like homework to me. But there are people who like to do academically inclined submissions to conferences, and some of those conferences only take full-blown academic papers. So if you want to do that, go for it. It's a very long process, and it's almost like defending your dissertation or presenting your findings to peers, and be ready for very negative feedback, because it will happen. White paper. Maybe this is where marketing comes in. So you give your information, you have a couple meetings with your marketing people, and they're like, yeah, we can create collateral out of this, or we can make an informational paper that we can put on the website that sales can direct people to. You might feel a little dirty, but make sure that you keep creative control over how the information is presented. If you offer to write the entire thing, then you have control, and they're just doing edits. The last thing you want is to hand over results to a marketing person, and apologies to any marketing people in the room. If you're handing over just raw results to a marketing person, they are going to weave whatever story they think is going to help sell the product, service, or company. Whereas if you are the researcher and you're presenting your findings in a white paper, you can make it as technical or as high level as you want it to, and have a story or have a narrative that you've created. I'm going to skip over the academic program. Visualization. I'm a very big visualization fan, and there's a lot of tools out there that can help you get visualizations done very, very quickly and very easily. Excel, still a great tool. Google Sheets, also pretty good visualizations. Raw, So this website raw, you just drop your CSV or TSV file into a web window, and then it gives you all the options for different advanced D3 visualizations. Tableau is free for the public. And plus, you can host your findings on their site. So there's an interactive web page that you can direct people to so they can interact with your data. And it's free. Open Graffiti, this is something that we built at OpenDNS. It's a 3D immersive semantic network graph. Little bit on the high end. Looks great on vendor booths to show your data moving around in 3D. Probably not the easiest thing to consume for the layperson. Graphics. Never discount a good table or a visualization. A lot of people hate doing infographics. I don't have a problem with infographics, provided there is an associated detailed report that infographic can direct people to. Because when I see an infographic, I see, oh, great, marketing campaign, cool. You asked like 10 people what they thought of your product, and they all said it was 100% the greatest. Whereas if it's associated with a research report, then it's a little bit more digestible. Doesn't hurt your soul. Conference talks, hey, look at me. Press interviews when you're at the conference. Let people know ahead of time that you're speaking at XYZ conference on your topic. When you're talking to reporters and press, SBAC, sound bites and charts. They love pictures because they can copy and paste them. They also like it if you send them paragraphs or sentences in emails because they can copy and paste them. These folks are very busy, make their jobs easier. Code. Again, I told you I'm a very poor coder, and you can see that on my Git repo. But you may want to look at Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter Notebooks are a great way to step through your data and represent it. So you publish the Jupyter Notebook, and then someone can validate your findings. They can prove or disprove what you've seen, and you're putting it in the public domain. Say, yeah, here's my work. Here are my findings. Go to town. You should, if you can, publish your raw source data, not your massaged aggregate data. If you post aggregate data, then people are going to think that you were monkeying around to find the results that you want. So if you give them access to the raw data, if you can, that will go a long way in defending your research. So again, when you write code, keep in mind you're collaborating with your future self. I can tell you that 2 years ago, Andrew must have hated future Andrew because his code sucks. And it doesn't get any better. So we're almost at the end here, but sometimes you will have to defend your research, whether it's in front of a crowd, whether it's in a meeting with people, peers, press, and know that there are a lot of people that, some people just want to see the world burn. They might think your research is great, but they could be jealous, they could be bitter that you got to the finish line before them. They might just be grandstanders and be very upset that you're taking the limelight off them. That does happen. I've worked with people like that. It's like, no, why are we talking about you? We should be talking about me and my great research. Okay. Always argue with your data. So if they say this can't be true, well, the data supports these findings. Take a look at the data. Most of the times they'll be like, well, I don't have time for that. I'm like, well, here's the data when you do have time. Until then, how about we agree that what I did was right? And if they say, this can't be right, say, okay, well, take a look at the data, and I'm happy to discuss alternative findings if you find them. And again, they'll be like, oh, I don't have time. And, based on my research, like, well, take a look at my data. Well, I don't want to do that. I'm like, well, then, conversation over. Sometimes it's okay to walk away. I'll skip that. So responsible disclosure, this is a very big one. Again, some people want to see the world burn, but the last thing, so you should be responsibly disclosing this to the vendor if you make a finding. And I'll tell you why. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but when we disclosed everything to Toy Talk about Hello Barbie, they actually had yet to start their bug bounty program. It was actually starting 2 weeks after the call that we had. And they're like, we wish this could have gone through our bug bounty program, but here's 10 grand. We appreciate your findings. Like, 10 grand, hey, cool. So if you disclose responsibly, you may not get all the fame and glory, but hey, you could make some money, you could make some contacts. It could be good for your career to responsibly disclose, because no one's going to want to work with you if the moment you find something wrong and you go, hey, look at this, look at this company, they're stupid. That's not good research outcome. And the last thing you really want to be called by industry experts is a narcissistic vulnerability pimp. And this is usually in collaboration with an individual or a company that has a logo and a website specific to the vulnerability that they've found, and it goes live the moment their press release goes out, because that is marketing-driven research. If it has a logo, it's speculative. So anyone can research something. It's whether you have the time, the questions, if you can do something with the results. And make sure that you establish a process that is repeatable, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel every single time you do this. Your methodology is your bond. Like, this is, if you can show how you research something, then it becomes very hard for someone to argue with your process. Disclose responsibly, because you could make 10 grand, and it's the right thing to do. And some people just want to see the world burn. So if people come to you, and this happens with vendors. Vendors will come to you and say, why are you hacking our products? We're going to sue you. Like, okay, why are you going to sue me? I'm trying to help you. I'm going to disclose this responsibly. Make sure you have a lawyer friend just in case. Talk to your general counsel at the company you're working for. Make sure they have this in place. But for the most part, you're doing them a favor by giving them free research. Most of them will take it. Most of them are very good to work with. Some point fingers. If you want to kind of kick yourself into data science world, the executive data science program online on Coursera, very, very good, very iterative. So it's not like, it's definitely a walk or crawl, walk, run type of thing, not sprint right away. Code Academy, if you want to learn how to code. I've got a bunch of books here that I have purchased. I haven't read them all. They look good on my bookshelf, but these are good reference material. It's not a novel. You don't read it cover to cover. So I know we're kind of out of time. I'm going to be around today and tomorrow. If you have any questions, please stop me. And thanks for coming to BSides.